Moya, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Oh my
Yes,
gosh, I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited too. I'm so excited for my audience to learn more about you and your story. But let's start off with an introduction for anyone who is meeting you for the first time. Let them know who is Moya Jimenez.
Hi, I'm Moya. I wear many hats in my life. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm currently a student. I'm getting my yoga teacher training certification with the intention of teaching yoga eventually when I feel ready. I'm also working. I work at a gym, which is honestly a really nice job for me. I just got back into work, so I was a stay-at-home mom for a really long time. And I'm also a Latinx Indigenous creator. I also have a podcast of my own. But yeah, I'm many things.
Yes, multifaceted being. I love coming across women like you, especially Latinas. The story that we're going to get into is a pretty heavy one. I do want to put a trigger warning out now for anyone who's listening. We're both survivors of domestic violence, and anyone who knows me knows that I hold that really near and dear to my heart because it is a very big part of my story. It's not my full story, but it really has shaped me into the woman that I have been able to become because of that experience. And I want to know more about you and your story in surviving that. But before we even get started there, talk about what life looked like for baby Moya growing up.
First, want to say thank you so much for providing this space for not just me, but so many women, and for you to be so vulnerable and speak on your story because definitely provide a lot of healing for us. And it's a great way to activate our own voice to hear someone else speak their truth. So, oh my gosh, I have so much love for you.
Likewise.
When I was really young, I grew up with both parents. It was me and my younger sister. We're 6 years apart. We do a lot of things together, honestly. We weren't the most financially fortunate people, but back in my days, things were a lot cheaper. So, like going camping was like $6. So, going camping was something that we did very frequently throughout the summer. So, we were very much in touch with just doing things out in nature. We'd go to the beaches. Later on, maybe when I was about 10 or 12, that's kind of when I started to lose my dad. My dad does have a bipolar disorder. So, he was heavily affected around that time. And he was the person that I connected with the most because I feel like when you have both parents, you tend to connect more deeply with one or the other. It doesn't mean that you love the other more. It's just that connection is just there. So my dad was my anchor and I lost him in a sense when I was 10 and 11. And it was hard for me because I was a child and I didn't really understand mental health much. I just understood that I lost my dad, but he wasn't dead. He was still physically there, but like spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, like he was just not the same. And I could sense that because of how deep our connection was.
For him to physically still be there, but mentally like not, how did that
Yeah.
affect you in that moment? Because like you said, you didn't know what mental health was, but I want to assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that that definitely affected the relationships that you found yourself in later on in life.
I want to say that there was a heavy correlation to that because I guess, like in my relationships, I just felt like I didn't really have that guidance. And maybe I tended to be attracted more to people who were kind of able to fill that void versus being attracted to people who empower me and I can just genuinely see like living life with. I just kind
Right.
of was trying to fill the void. And it was really hard because my mom, that's her husband, you know what I mean? And she lost him too, but she was being like a total bitch at that time. And I say that with a lot of love because I understand the pain that she was going through, but she didn't know how to handle that. She lost her husband. Her husband didn't love her the same way. She wasn't receiving that love that she once received. And neither was
Mm.
I, neither was my younger sister. We're 6 years apart. I'm not sure how that affected her in a way, but that was definitely a really difficult transitional period in my life. It was a really hard time in my life. So I just had to go on through my adolescence without having my rock and having to see my mom struggle emotionally because of her romantic life. I used to have a lot of resentment against her because of it, but as I got older and I got married and I would even say even before that, once I started to kind of solidify what I wanted in a relationship, that's when I kind of started to forgive my mom for being so heartbroken. During that time, this was like 2010 era, like mental health was still very taboo. It was still frowned upon. Medication was something that it was very shameful. People aren't as open and honest and comfortable as they are now, which I think is beautiful. Like we definitely need that as a collective to just embrace mental health and learn how to like nurture and nourish it. But back then it was not like that. And I was also really embarrassed to tell my friends that my dad had bipolar disorder because of the stereotypes, right? Like he has bipolar disorder. Does that mean he has two personalities? And it's like, no, it just means he has really high highs and he has really low lows. And sometimes the lows last longer than expected. And I felt like when I turned 10, 11, it lasted years. That was really, really hard for me. So kind of looking back at it, it's no surprise that I did end up in an abusive relationship. I hate to say that, but statistically, I fit the mold. I was prone to it. I was vulnerable. When your dad isn't available to kind of tell you like, mira, mija, si no se hacen las cosas, like, oh, for the English viewers, look, sweetie, that's not how things are done. That's not how a man should treat you. You don't know. And then when your mom is checked out and doesn't want to give you that guidance either, or even provide that space because she doesn't have you to provide that space, it's hard. You're on your own.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I always love going back to childhood with every guest because it really does paint the picture, especially when we talk about what we're going to talk about next. A lot of the shit that we experienced during that time period affects us as we get older. So I really appreciate your vulnerability for sharing that with my audience. I do have a follow-up question. Your father is still here with us?
Yeah, so my dad is still alive. He moved to Mexico. I feel like that was such a great decision for him. As hard as it was to have him in a different country, I feel like him being in his homeland and being around family is what he needed because I want to say I have a good relationship with my dad. It's not ideal. It's not what I would fully want it to be, but I do call him every week, if not every 2 weeks. And I don't know, I love catching up with him. I love connecting with him in that sense. I do miss him. I'm just really happy that my father is able to feel accepted in where he's at right now. Yeah. And I know he has a lot of regret and remorse for the things that he did, not being available and just like hurting us in that sense. But I'm just really happy for him.
I know it's not easy to talk about, but I think in having those uncomfortable conversations for people to listen and tune into, maybe that can open up a door for their own relationships with their parents and hopefully one day being able to navigate it in that way. So I appreciate you for opening up and letting us know about that. I think it's really important. I just want to give you your flowers. Now let's shift the conversation into you sharing in regards to the abusive relationship that you were in. If there's some scenarios that stick out for you that you're comfortable enough to share, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, of course. When I met this guy, I was 15. I met him through a friend. So he was a friend of a friend. I want to say he was very persistent. Unlike the other boys that I had met around that time, they were all very timid, kind of expected the girl to chase after them. And I don't like chasing. I like being chased. I'm a Scorpio. I don't know. Is that my toxic trait? Maybe. But I want to know that I'm worthy, that I mean something, I'm valuable. So this guy was persistent. Did I like him? I don't know. I don't think I was in a space to really understand what I was attracted to at that time, what a good quality relationship looked like. But looking back at it now, there were so many red flags that I didn't recognize them because I was inexperienced. So I didn't recognize these red flags. My parents don't have a good relationship. Well, I'm going to have a beautiful relationship. Yep. And, he did this stuff where he kind of promised this idea of forever. And I fell for it. It sounded good. Society told me it was good. The church I was in told me it was good. I want that. That sounds beautiful. Everyone says that. That's happiness. That's success. This guy talked about how he wanted to work in tech and he was going to make a lot of money and all this stuff. Like he would want to take care of me and all this kind of things, but he would start to strip away certain aspects of myself that made me flourish. I used to be a pianist. I'm no longer. I dropped it. I want to get back into it, but singing and playing piano, he would say, that's annoying. That's weird. I don't like the sounds of that. So I slowly stopped. I used to love cooking. Oh, I still love cooking. I picked it back up. But like at that time, like I loved cooking, but he was so picky and he'd be like, this doesn't taste good. I don't want that in my food. I just stopped cooking. And maybe before I met him, a lot of people would find me very attractive, not just in a physical sense. And I was the one who would get hit on a lot, but he would shut me down a lot. So he'd kind of be like, oh, this girl could be a model. You could never be a model. Like just little things like that. And I'd be like, wow, like where is this coming from? And that's abuse within itself. And I didn't recognize that. I was like, well, abuse is when they hit you. Interesting enough, just a little trigger warning, but the circumstances manipulated me into giving into sex when I didn't want to do it, because the church I was in created this illusion like you save yourself for the person you love. Once you lose your virginity, that's the person you have to be with for the rest of your life. Like it's so sacred. And I do agree that sex is sacred, but I think there's also a lot more to it. It's a lot more complex than just save it till marriage.
Yeah.
And the guy I was with, he was very like, well, if you love me, like you'll have sex with me. Like what's stopping you? Like we're going to get married. We're going to have this, this, and that. So, I was 15 and this guy was threatening to break up with me if I didn't have sex with him. And this guy promised me all these things. I wanted that. And he made it seem like I wasn't going to get that anywhere else because I wasn't pretty enough, because I couldn't be a model, because I didn't look hot, because my butt wasn't as big as this girl's or my boobs weren't as big as that girl's and all this kind of stuff. So I did give in. I had sex with him and I don't even remember the first time having sex. It wasn't significant to me. It didn't mean anything to me. It wasn't what I wanted it to be.
And we just pause right there before we continue, because I think it's really important for listeners and especially people out there who have like young daughters. I have an almost 14-year-old. It blows my mind how often teenagers find themselves in these types of relationships and they don't realize how these relationships get started. When it comes to these relationships, it is so calculated. There's so much manipulation. There's so much emotional abuse, how it typically starts off as. And I really want to drive that point home to people who are listening, who have not been in these types of relationships or who are in these types of relationships right now that it hasn't gotten abusive, but it's like, oh my God, this is abuse. This is exactly what it means to be in these types of toxic ass relationships with these men or women too. This is what happens. It happens like a slow drip, one thing after another, and then eventually it builds to the big explosion. But I want people to realize this shit happens over time. It doesn't like you immediately go into this relationship and it's just abusive from day one. They break down your confidence. They say these things about you. There was so much shit that you were saying I was thinking about in my last relationship too. He would just say these comments when a girl was walking by or when he saw someone on the TV and just put me down. And then I would internalize that feeling and be like, I need to do something to prove my worth to him because obviously he doesn't see that in me. So what can I do to one up that girl? You know what I'm saying? And it's so fucked up how it breaks us down in the process of being in that relationship. So I really thank you so much for talking about the emotional aspect of it, because that part of being in an abusive relationship goes so unnoticed and it's not talked about enough.
It really isn't. It's often dismissed or even gaslit. Well, that's not abusive. That was just toxic. You can't relate, but it's like, no, it's abuse. I think even for moms listening who either their children are of that age in which I was or eventually will be, like, I think it's also important for them to also understand that aspect and be able to communicate so that they don't become either the victim or the person giving it, and just having that awareness, because abuse starts somewhere. Like you said, it doesn't just happen like you're in the relationship and then they all of a sudden like hit you. It's like, no, like there's other forms of abuse beyond physical.
Absolutely. I'll let you get back to sharing about your story, but I wanted to highlight that because we don't talk about it enough. We ignore it or we gaslight ourselves. Oh, it's not that serious. I did that all the time. Maybe he's just having a bad day. And then eventually the abuse got more and more and more. I appreciate you for sharing that.
No, it's a really good point to highlight as well, because like not to put his whole life out there, but his dad was an alcoholic and his dad was very abusive to his mom. This boy treated his mom like shit. That was a red flag. I didn't know to look for that. You know, he talked so much shit on his mom, and I was like, wow, his mom really is like a bitch. Like, wow, like she sounds really fucked up. But then as months go by, you start to kind of immerse yourself in the family and you kind of start to see everything for what it is. Him seeing his dad treat his mom like shit, like monkey see, monkey do, monkey pee all over you. Like he did exactly that. Like that's what he learned. That was normal behavior to him. I think understanding that and having that awareness also kind of helped me be able to remove that blame from myself and also kind of allowed me to let go and in a sense forgive what happened versus like clinging on to it, just seeing the pain that his mom went through as well. Speaking on that, I feel like at some point, like his mom knew for her it was easier to live in denial than accept the truth because she fought to be in his life. She had that boy and this asshole of a dad was trying to take that away from her. She fought to be his mom, and for him to just come out, turn around and be just like his dad and treat her just as bad, like how do you live with that?
Do you think, because this is another very on-trend word, narcissist and gaslighting, another word that a lot of people talk about nowadays is trauma bonding. Do you feel like you had a trauma bond with him?
I don't think I've really sat with enough time to like really think on that, to say like yes or to say no, because I think another part of it is he didn't let me talk about stuff. Like maybe at the beginning he did, but that was probably just to kind of feel me out, see where he could get me when he was trying to pursue me. But after I had sex with him, like it wasn't like that anymore. But maybe him kind of painting this picture of his mom being an asshole and his life being so hard, even though looking back at it, there was a lot of hard stuff, but he also had a lot of privileges within his life. Like maybe that was, I felt connected to that, but I'm not sure on that question.
I appreciate you for being honest. When I think about my ex, he definitely had a very different upbringing compared to mine. I didn't grow up in a home with abuse. I didn't grow up in the projects. I didn't have a hard life growing up. Like I had a very normal, quote unquote, stable upbringing. His was the complete opposite. And when it came to me trying to find out more about his past, I felt like it was like pulling teeth. He was very secretive with talking about himself, but in the same sense, I felt like I wanted to save him. We want to be people pleasers. We want to like love them more. We want to show them a life that they haven't had before. And that's also another form of abuse when you're in those relationships. Let me just show him something that he's never had before. Let me do things that I'm not used to doing just to please him.
Yeah, because I definitely found myself trying to like influence and make him see the light. And I'm a very lighthearted person. That's just how I am. I kind of wanted to give that to him because he was just so angry, so negative. Dare I say he was so spoiled. And I was just trying to humble him and show him the way.
How long were you guys together?
We were together for almost 4 years. It's insane to me that it went on for that long. I understand why it went on for that long. Well, I'll share a story before I get into that. But the reason why I knew his mom knew about everything was because the abuse became apparent to me when I started to get into like guns and knives, because he would always threaten me. He'd threaten to hurt me with one. He threatened to hurt himself. Whenever I'd bring up like the red flags, you know, my heart was like, that doesn't feel right. Like if I bring it up, he'd be like really dismissive. There was one day in particular that sticks with me. It's just crazy that I even went through this. It feels almost unreal, but we got into an argument. He basically threw me against a wall. I hit my head on the wall. I fell onto the ground. He grabbed his machete and I just started crying and screaming. I remember his mom walking in and just being like, oh my fucking God, what are you doing to this poor girl? Like she was shocked. No one called the cops. No one really checked in on me. The most that happened was his dad basically took him into his room, yelling at him. I don't know what was going on. And the mom was like, did he hit you? Did he hit you? I said no, because he didn't. He pushed me against the wall and threatened me with a weapon. I didn't want to get him in trouble either. There was that where he's like, oh, oh, look what you did. Just putting the blame on me. I was so young. I think I was 16 and I felt really scared, but I felt stuck. I couldn't tell anyone anything. I didn't have a voice. My voice was gone. And the mom was like, well, he didn't hit you, so it's okay. I'm sorry to say, but that should be communicated to my parents. Parent involvement is vital when it comes to abusive relationships and adolescence. I didn't feel safe to tell my mom. I didn't feel safe to tell my dad. I didn't feel safe to tell anybody. And he would constantly threaten me as well. I don't know. It's just like really sad to think that 16-year-old me, still a child, had to go through that by myself. And it was the first of many. And it was that moment that I knew I'm in an abusive relationship and I don't know how to get out.
I just appreciate you so much for sharing that story. I know it's not easy to talk about, even imagining it, especially being a 16-year-old. I couldn't imagine the fear that you felt in your body. So I just want to hold space for you. I can relate so much of what you said in regards to not speaking up because you were afraid to get him in trouble. In my situation, on the night when I almost lost my life, I ran to my best friend's apartment. I'll never forget. I was knocking, banging on her door at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, open up. He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me. When she opens up the door and she sees how I look, I was like afraid to call 911. Like I had to get, I don't want to say permission from her, but she had to reinforce in me to be like, Leanne, you need to call the police. And I was afraid to do so because I was afraid of what was going to happen to him. Not the fact that I almost died. But my first thought probably doesn't make sense to other people, but it'll make sense to you because you've been in that situation before. I was afraid to get him in trouble. It's so wild to think about that dynamic of the victim of the abuse having that mindset. You know what I mean?
I feel like oftentimes the victim takes on this role of a protector.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's coming from. And speaking from a woman, for me, it's like we just want to nurture and protect and create. And we take on that role oftentimes when we're in an abusive relationship. You become this little protector. It's almost like an instinct. And it's really fucked up.
It's so fucked up. And just like the healing that comes from that, we're going to get into that later. Okay, so you were in that relationship for about 4 years. I would love for you to share what was the moment made you permanently walk away from that relationship.
There's one more thing I should add because it'll make more sense, the aha moment. But when I turned 17, I did get pregnant by this guy. When I found out, I know it's triggering for some people. I'm pregnant. I'm not meant to have this baby. I was pregnant with twins. I was like, I'm not supposed to be with this person. So I felt it in my heart. I felt it from the universe. I felt it from God. When the doctor told me, I was like, I'm not having it. They took me into an office because they did suspect that I was being abused, but we become really good at hiding things. We become really good at pretending, at lying, at saying what is need to be said because your abuser makes you rehearse these things prior to going out into the world. They scheduled an abortion at my 9-week appointment because I believe it's because they wanted to give me that space to make that decision for myself because they had that suspicion of abuse and they didn't know what was going on. He was still abusing me, didn't change. He was still treating me the way he treated me, even being pregnant. And at my 8 weeks, I had a miscarriage by myself at the age of 17 in my bathroom, no parent involvement. I was by myself and that was traumatizing. And that is when I felt super stuck. So when I turned 18 on my birthday, I lost my friend. She died in a plane crash. It was very difficult for me because on the day of my birthday, I wasn't notified. And I think it was because it was my birthday. So I found out the next day. And it broke my heart because I love this person dearly. We were so young, like we're 18, and I just couldn't believe that she died. She didn't know much, but from what she knew, she didn't want me to be with them. And I was just grieving for a little bit. And then maybe a couple of days after her death, I caught text messages that this guy was having with someone else. And he had cheated on me before my friend's death and even after. And that was my aha moment. That's where I was like, no way you did this to me, knowing what you know and knowing what I've been through. He did cheat on me in the past, but it's just like at this time, that was way too low for me, especially the connection that I had with this person and everything that we had been through together, like me and this guy, everything that I put up with when it came to him. And he couldn't hold this space for me that I literally lost my friend. It forced me to see the world around me. I was living in denial for so long. And then my friend dying, it just put me in this place. The veil came off. It's like, holy fuck. And I just left. And he tried to fight for me because it wasn't the first time he's cheated. It wasn't the first time I tried to break up with him. But this time I left. And I had also found out during that same time that my best friend, who's now my husband, that my best friend was also in the beginning stages of an abusive relationship with his girlfriend at the time. I didn't want that for him. And I was like, how the fuck am I going to sit here and tell him to walk away, tell him that he's strong enough to leave, but I'm still stuck here in this relationship and I'm grieving the loss of my friend and I feel so heartbroken and I feel like a piece of me is missing. And the fact that the idea of this guy dying sounds like a relief to me. Everything like just turned around for me and I had to leave. So I walked away and was somewhat honest, but not fully honest with the relationship with my friends. I told them it was just really bad and that he just cheated on me. And I told them about the miscarriage and all this stuff and why I was gone from school for like a whole semester. But that was when I walked away, but he was still very persistent for the next 2 years. And I had to fight those 2 years.
I wanted to highlight something that was really important that you said. Your eyes woke up and you were able to see the world for what it was. And I think that is so powerful for you to have mentioned. And it's unfortunate that it happens in the seasons where something very traumatic happens, like the loss of your friend. For me, it was almost losing my life when I finally woke the fuck up and saw the relationship for what it was. And I think that's really, really important to highlight because women and men, but predominantly women find ourselves in these kinds of relationships. We are blinded by what we think is love. We do stay because of the potential, because of what we think this person can be. And we need to not do that and realize what the fuck is standing right in front of us. More times than not, these relationships are not going to change. The abuse is going to continue happening. Unfortunately, it is in instances where a really big thing needs to happen in order for you to realize that. So I'm glad that you really talked about that and highlighted that because our judgment can get very clouded when we're in these relationships. All we see is this person in front of us and we're ignoring all the shit that's happening until sometimes it's too late. And sometimes we're not even able to sit here and have these conversations because we succumb to the abuse that we're going through.
Exactly. I love that you even brought up the whole clinging on to potential because it's true. We see the potential. Like oftentimes when you're a very lighthearted and optimistic person, I feel like in your case, you're a very ambitious person. You have that go-getter personality and you make things happen. And I love that about you. Like you're so inspiring. So it makes sense where you see that in other people because that's what you embody and you see that potential. Like this person could be really happy. Like I can provide the love and the space for this person to thrive and all this stuff. But like, is it really potential or is it an ideology? I think it's just an ideology at that point. But our brain tells us like, no, it's potential. Like this person has it in them and I can bring it out. And
you lose yourself in the process of trying to do that.
Exactly. Maybe you can, but what are you compromising? Is it your life?
You better talk about it, sis. Yeah. I love that so much. Now I want to talk about how to start healing after that abusive relationship. For me, it still is an emotional roller coaster. I've done a lot of work. It's been a little over 2 years since I left that relationship and a lot has happened in between. But I would love for you, and you actually mentioned this when you filled out the application to be on here. I want you to talk about the grief that comes after leaving an abusive relationship. It is like you're mourning a death, right? For me, I had this picture, we talked about potential in my head, of what it was going to be like because I had a track record of shitty relationships before I met him. He was great. He was the one Prince Charming, everything was rainbows and fucking butterflies. It's like the shit that you see playing on my YouTube right now until it wasn't. I remember in the beginning stages after leaving that relationship and even him being in prison and everything, it was such an uncomfortable feeling for me that I felt sad and I missed him. And I still had those feelings that I loved him, even though he hurt me, even though he almost took my life, I still was grieving the loss of that relationship. So I would love for you to talk about what that experience was like for you and how have you been able to heal from an abusive relationship?
So I definitely want to add that I've had 7 years of healing versus anything less than 5. And the reason I really want to put that out there is because I really want to emphasize that it takes time to figure out what works for you and what you want to do with that trauma. How do you want to go about it? How do you want to express it? And how do you want to tend to it? It's going to be different for everyone. And also you have to like rediscover yourself. But in regards to the grief, it is really, really sad when you walk away, not only because, you know, you're grieving that dream, that ideology, that potential that could have been, or that life that was promised. But when you're with this person for a long time, you start to immerse yourself into their life. So you make connections with their family, with their friends, and you cultivate these relationships and these connections that they feel so good and they're genuine. But when you walk away from your abuser, you also have to let those go. And I think that's the hardest part because sometimes you really don't want to because you see how this particular person is an asset to your life, but it's not safe. And that's something you need to get through your head. It's not safe to have any type of connection or to have any way for this person to follow you throughout your life. You need to disconnect. You need to cut the tether. And that's hard. It was hard leaving his mom because when his mom's father passed away, I was the one who held her while she cried and everyone was telling her to shut the fuck up because she was grieving. She was wailing. She was crying. She couldn't sleep. And I would sleep over and I'd come into her bed and I would hold her and let her cry and let her talk and just hold that space for her to be a child grieving their father again. Within that, you create that connection and you have to let it go. Even with his grandparents, obviously they all loved me. Why wouldn't they? I have a lot to bring into a space and I had to let go of that too. And that was hard at the time. Looking back at it now, I don't miss it. I know that sounds fucked up. I've made so many beautiful connections now and I'm very content and happy with them because they genuinely nourish me. But at that time, as an 18-year-old girl, I feel like if you're 18, you're still technically a child. I was really sad about it. I had to grieve that. I had to grieve the friends also that I made because of him. He'll come up with these lies and they'll kind of see it as not bad as it was. He called me the psycho girlfriend and stuff. And I'm like, who was the one holding a gun to my head? Like, that was you. I don't see how me panicking and screaming and having a panic attack is psycho. I think it's a very natural reaction to have to that. Grieving the loss of those connections and the ideology of what was promised, really hard. And I feel like that's also something that doesn't get talked about.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. And it makes me think not of the last relationship that I was in, the one that he's in prison, but I was in an 8.5 year long, I call it a situationship, not really a relationship because it was just so toxic. And I remember when I permanently walked away from that relationship, I blocked his mom, I blocked his sister, I blocked every person that I knew. Like I went full no contact because I knew if I really wanted to finally move on from that relationship, because I was the type who would break up to make up, break up to make up over 8.5 years, I had to have nothing. I had to go like cold turkey, you know, like a cigarette smoker. I used to smoke cigarettes and I quit cold turkey, like cut it off completely. And I remember there was a couple of times when I moved to Florida after leaving that relationship, I was still friends with my ex's mom on Facebook. And when I got my first apartment, she was like congratulating me. You know what? This is re-triggering my trauma. He was supposed to come down to Florida with me and he didn't. So now you got to go. And I blocked her and I was like, that's it. Like I have to, for me, my sanity, my own mental health, like you got to go. But it's a part of the grieving process. And I'm so glad you brought that up because we don't talk about that enough.
Yeah. And I don't think it makes you a bad person to cut it
No,
off either. It's
no,
a necessary means in order to heal. You
setting
have to
those
heal.
boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a boundary. Boundaries are meant to protect your peace, and you shouldn't expect other people to change just to accommodate to your healing process.
Yeah.
So even if the friend is, oh, well, I don't want to talk to them anymore. It's like, well, maybe you need to cut them off for a while because seeing them is still going to remind you of things. And I think you're a little too raw for that right now. And just being honest with yourself in that sense. We're an open wound when we leave. Everything hurts. Everything is triggering. You get extremely anxious. It's hard to be around people. It's hard to trust people. I feel like you struggle a lot with imposter syndrome because you had to pretend for so long. And then when you're trying to reconnect to the things that you loved, for instance, for me, it was like the music, the singing, spiritual work, and things as such, yoga and fitness. It felt weird. It felt very foreign, even though it was calling to me. It's my roots. And it's just hard. I was just so vulnerable. Like if someone, if at that time I was singing and someone were to say like, I don't really like the sound of your voice, or, maybe you should try singing another song. Oh my gosh, it would hurt me. I could not hear that.
It's such a roller coaster of emotions that no one can prepare for. And that's why I feel this personal development healing journey, especially after abuse, it's so cliche, but it's not linear at all. There's so many highs, there's so many lows, there's so many in-betweens where you feel stuck. Like I've had those moments too. I want to do more, but I don't really know what to do next. And that's why I think it's important for me, like hiring a life coach, working with a therapist, getting that outside help, having these conversations, connecting with people who have gone through similar experiences. That is also a part of the whole healing journey too. I would love for you to share some advice for anyone who's listening, who's been where we were in the beginning stages. They've done the no contact. They're starting to talk about it a little bit. What would you say is some advice you would share in order to start the process in a healthy way?
Really emphasizing that expression, like you said.
Yeah.
Because when you're in that, if you're into chakras, your throat chakra is being suppressed. You do not have a voice. So being able to use that voice, express yourself, whether again, it's with a therapist or it's with an online community with people who have been through the same stuff and can empathize with you. And it's led by someone who has experience in that. That's a great way. Or a trusted friend or loved one or family member. If you can just talk about it, speak your truth, or if you really don't have anyone or you don't feel safe just yet, journal, write it out, express yourself, let it out, because that's honestly the first step after is just getting it out there and finding that method that allows you to speak truthfully and authentically and remove that shame of what you've been through.
I'm so glad you brought up the word shame because that's such a big feeling that us survivors feel. We take on that feeling of like, oh, what did I do to deserve it? That's something that I experienced myself. Like, what could I have done differently? And what you need to realize is that you didn't ask for what happened to you. It's not your fault. It's everything on them and nothing on you. What I feel personally is while you didn't deserve and you didn't ask for what happened to you, what you are responsible for is how you heal from it. That is up to you. No one else can do that work for you. Yes, it's beautiful to find communities. It's beautiful to ask for help. It's beautiful to hire people, go to therapy, journal, whatever it is. But the only person who's going to make that happen for you and let it be sustainable is you.
Exactly. I think oftentimes when you get out of it, you really diminish your potential and your power, but you have so much more power than you think. You have so much autonomy than you think. You are more than capable of creating ways to heal yourself, to get back out there, to forgive yourself. You need to forgive yourself for being in the situation, and you need to forgive yourself for blaming yourself for not knowing any better. There's just a lot of forgiveness going on. For me, what really helped was being honest, allowing that shit talk in my head to be honest. When I journal, I'll be like, I can't believe I did this, and that. I put it all out there. Like, I can't believe I was so stupid. I hate how things are going right now. And then when I kind of start to see is as I keep writing, eventually that light in me starts to come out and starts to heal that aspect of me that is hurting. Learning to embrace that side of you and understanding that that side of you is actually in need of being heard and receiving love and nurture. It's so much easier to talk to it and receive it and guide it and nurture it. My shadow self isn't a demon. It's just an extension of me in need of love and nurture. And I love her unconditionally because she is me. And honestly, I feel like having my daughter really helped me see that extension of me as something worth loving. When you finally allow yourself to accept that demon inside of you, that demon in your head is just an aspect of you in need of love.
You know what's interesting? And I just realized it. The beginning half of this podcast, it was very choppy and I could still hear it, but the video was like when you were talking about the dark negative shit. But now that you're talking about like the positive healing side, it's very seamless. It's like I can hear you, I can see you. I'm like, yo, that's God right there. That's insane. One thing I wanted to highlight before I go to the next question. I love that you brought up that you show love for the dark side of you, the inner shadow. One thing that my life coach, we've been talking about me struggling with feelings of like feeling safe enough to put myself back out there when it comes to dating because of the abuse that I've gone through and having this fear. And one thing she said to me, it is okay for you to want happiness and to be happy and to be fulfilled, but to also live with that fear at the same time. Like those emotions, they don't need to be separate. And I'm the type of person that I can't see like, oh, I can be scared and happy at the same time. And they can coexist with one another and it's okay. So I love the fact that you brought that part up that like you said, it's calling out for help. It wants your love, it wants your affection, but you know, maybe it's not doing it in the most healthiest way, but it's okay to coincide with that feeling. And I think that's really important, especially for us as survivors of abuse. It's okay to have this dichotomy of these two extreme emotions and they can intertwine and live together in peace.
Exactly. I think that is beautifully said. If whoever's listening or watching this needs a visual, just think of a pole and here's that little like negative aspect, which is on my left hand. And then I have the positive, the light on my right hand. They're on a pole. So they come together in the middle and it's perfect neutrality. Or, you know, however if you want to bring that darkness into the light, that's totally fine too. But they're on the same pole. And I think sometimes we think they're on different spectrums, but they're not. It's duality for a reason. They're on opposite ends of the spectrum. And you just got to take a couple steps to bring them back together.
Yes, it's like the yin and the yang, right? Like
exactly.
I love that. Oh, I just got like chills. That's amazing. All right. So now I want to ask you, because you brought it up a little bit earlier, especially as a survivor of abuse. And it doesn't just need to be domestic violence. Anyone who's listening, whatever abuse you've gone through and healing from it, when you have those triggers or those flashbacks that come up, one, how do you navigate through those moments that come up? And two, what would be some advice you would give to a listener who is struggling through those moments of the triggers that come up when it comes to overcoming abuse?
I'll first answer to the viewer or the listener is seek a professional and look into the different types of therapy and kind of decide which one resonates with you more, like your personality or your lifestyle, and find a therapist within that practice and ask them for different methods. Allow them to guide you through that and just see what works best for you and on what occasions they work best for you. Because what works for me is I love to do a lot of mindfulness practices. So whether that's meditation or if I'm doing yoga or even when I'm eating, it's very like ceremonial. I'm eating in silence. I'm enjoying. I'm trying to be in the present or spending time with my daughter. I'm very like, it's a mindfulness practice for me because I'm there, I'm present. I feel like that really helps me, reminds my mind and my body where I am now versus living in the past and living in the trauma and living in the sadness or living in fear of the future as well. I think another thing that I love to do is journal. So if you do keep up with me, like on the platforms, then you know I love journaling.
Yes, I love your stories. I love when she has like the long paragraphs. I'm like holding it to read it. I'm like, oh, she's talking about something good.
I love journaling. I just, it's like a warm hug. So if you haven't tried that, definitely try it. If you don't want to physically journal, you can do it on your phone, whatever. And I think another thing that I do is to plan out fun. When you're in that cycle of abuse, you don't really have fun.
Not at
You're
all.
letting someone else lead and they're taking, like, if you want to do something fun, it's like, nah, I don't want to do that. Or you do it and then it ends up in a fight.
Yep.
Always plan out fun. I love planning out fun for myself. I feel like it's a great way to regulate myself and regulate the triggers and whatnot. Because oftentimes when we think of how do we deal with triggers, we think of in the moment, which breathing exercises are amazing. I love doing breathing exercises. And like I said, the mindfulness practice, but there also has to be that maintenance behind it. How are you going to nurture yourself when you're not having that trigger so that when you do have those triggers, you have a really good defense mechanism who's just like ready to grab it and take it on. And honestly, just like plan out fun. Do fun things.
Yeah.
If that means going for a walk and listening to the Watch Us Thrive podcast,
yes,
so be it. If it means like sitting down and doing your makeup and watching a YouTube video, like, so be it. If it means taking an extra long shower, so be it. If that's your version of fun, cool. If it means going out with friends, going to the beach, going to a museum, go do that. It's going to be hard at the beginning. You're going to fucking hate it. You're going to be super anxious. You're going to be super hyper vigilant. You're going to look like a psychotic person, just like, oh my gosh.
yes.
Like there's so many people around me. Like, am I going to die? Your body's going to be on high alert as well. And you're going to be extremely tired at the end of those sessions. But I promise you, the more you do it, the more you start to rediscover yourself and what you enjoy doing. So my last point is take naps. You're feeling triggered and you're fatigued. Take a nap because trauma is physical. It's not just mental, it's also physical. So after this little interview session, I'm going to go play tennis with my husband. It's going to be fun. And after that, I'm going to knock the fuck out.
Yes. Oh, I'm here for it. I love all those points so much. And I love that you brought up the fun aspect. I think for us, as we get older and we become moms and jobs and wives and all these things, like we lose that sense of who we are. We don't nourish our inner child.
Exactly.
One thing that I thought of that's fun for me, coloring. Adult coloring books, because y'all can see if you're watching on YouTube, like this is my art. I love to paint. This is my thing. You see Bob Ross, shout out to the GOAT right there. I love him. Coloring, like get an adult coloring book. I used to have one that had all curse words like fuck, cunt, bitch, so beautiful. And then I would just like color it, just spend hours just coloring it. And that would feed my inner child. Do whatever it is for you that brings that joy, because we neglect that part of ourselves so much, especially when we're in these types of relationships. We lose ourselves. We don't know who we are. It's so important on this healing journey to figure out who the fuck is Leanne by herself.
Yeah.
Who is Moya besides being a wife and a mom and, you know, working and all these things? Like, who are you at your core? And it's a lifelong journey that you're going to be on, but it's important to nourish those parts that we have neglected for so long. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, exactly. I love how you like rephrase it. It's so beautiful.
Thank you so much. Okay. So a couple more questions. Think about everything that you've been through, even the parts that you didn't share today, because I know you've lived 1,000 lives. I would love for you to tell us what is the most important thing you've learned about who you have become since all of those experiences that you've gone through.
I've definitely learned that I'm a very fluid person. And what I mean by that is I'm the type of person who can just adapt really well, who is very accepting. And I'm also worthy of receiving what is meant for me, the good and the bad. And I'm worthy of learning from the experience, from both good and bad. I think that's just a really beautiful thing to learn about oneself. After undergoing through everything, I have a lot more power than I may think. And going back to the duality, like I love that I'm in a space now where I allow myself to nurture both. Oh my gosh, my brain almost went Spanish mode.
It's okay. You get, listen, whatever you're called to say, please.
Yeah, but I can nurture both sides. And I think that's a lot of power within itself.
I love that. And I love that you brought up worth, because that's been one of the hardest parts for me, because I had no worth, I had no value, I had no confidence. Even before that relationship, I didn't know who Leanne was. And being on this healing and really going through the motions, I'm finally realizing who the fuck I am. And I deserve love. I deserve peace. I'm worthy of healthy love and healthy relationships and all these things. I think it's so beautiful for me that I'm taking that away from such a negative experience.
Yeah.
And I'm not allowing the shit that I've gone through to make me continue feeling like shit about myself, because it's easy for me to do that, right? It's easy for someone who's been abused, who's been cheated on, who's been lied to and neglected and all these things. It's easy to continue being a victim of your circumstance. And what I think it's so beautiful about me and you is that we're able to turn that around, to turn the pain into our power. And that's why I wanted you to come on and share just a little bit of your story, because I know you're giving hope to so many people.
Yeah, definitely. Learning is a choice.
Say it again. I don't think they heard that.
Learning is a choice.
Yes. I love that. I want to stay in the feel good vibes as we wind down the conversation. So you're on the Watch Us Thrive podcast. So tell me your definition of thriving.
I love this question too.
Yes.
After a lot of thinking, I decided that to thrive means to adapt and accept, kind of like what I mentioned before, to be able to adapt to the adversities that come your way, to be able to accept the opportunities that come your way. I think that's thriving. Thriving is trying and doing your best.
Yes. And doing it anyway, right?
And doing it anyways, even if you mess up like really bad.
Yes, because we have, and we will continue to do so.
Much.
Yes,
yeah.
I love that definition so much. Thank you for sharing that. This question might be heavy, but we have uncomfortable conversations and heavy conversations on this podcast. Being the goddess, the queen that you are, had the opportunity to say something to your abuser, what would you tell him?
Honestly, nothing. I feel like I've given him such a huge season of learning experiences. That's my offer to him, to be able to see that and reflect on it and make a choice. Whether he wants to change or whether he wants to continue to live in those abusive patterns. That's why there's just nothing. I'm not mad. I'm not spiteful. I just recognize that he was really hurt and really misguided, and what he did wasn't right. But the role he played in my narrative, in my life, doesn't define who he could be, and that's just up to him. I've given him more than enough, and there's nothing left to offer.
That's such a beautiful answer, because mine would have been, fuck you.
Believe me, that was mine maybe like 5 years ago.
Right.
It was like, I hope you die.
Mm-hmm. I hope you're suffering in prison.
Yeah. I hope your dick gets chopped off.
Right.
And you're forced to eat it. Morbid.
And it's also like not giving your power away again to that person, right? I think the best form of getting your lick back, like the youngins say nowadays, is not feeling anything towards that person. It's just you don't even matter in my life anymore. I feel like when you still have that anger and that resentment and that spitefulness, like you talked about, it's still a sense of that person having that power and control over you, even though you're no longer in that relationship. And trust me, y'all, there's still moments that I still have those feelings of, fuck you, I hope you're miserable.
Oh, yeah.
But, I'm a human being. I keep it all the way 100 and real with you guys, but holding on to those feelings is doing nothing for me but hindering my own growth. And it's not worth it in my eyes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say don't continue to feed it, but acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Acknowledge it and redirect it. Be like, yeah, fuck this guy. I'm so mad that he fucked me over. Now I have all this shit and stuff like that. And then again, express that voice, but then allow that power in you to be like, it's okay. Look how much we've done. Look where we're at now.
Yes.
Look how much you learned from that. And for you, Leanne, look how much space you're able to hold for so many people out there. And look at this platform and this community that you've created for so many people, including myself, to find and seek refuge here. That's such a beautiful thing. And fuck that guy. But look at you now.
Yes, look at me now. Exactly. Thank you so much. I received that. And I really just want to continue holding spaces for people like you to feel safe enough to speak their truth and to be able to show whoever comes across their episode that regardless of what the fuck you've gone through, like you said, look at you now. There's so much more to you besides what you've gone through. And I think it's just so beautiful to highlight people like you who are comfortable enough to talk about the uncomfortable topics. We really have to continue highlighting these conversations, because not only is it healing for listeners, but I'm sure it's healing for you every time you're able to talk about it.
It really is. One thing that I do want to add is my former choir jazz teacher. I used to be a jazz singer. During that period of time when I got pregnant, I almost dropped out of school, but I didn't. But this teacher really held space for me in that regard. She passed away and I was very heartbroken, and it brought up these wounds, right? Also, immense gratitude and appreciation for everything that she did for me. But she really opened up my eyes to what my intention is during this part of my life. And that's honestly just to provide that wisdom, to share my wisdom, because that's what she wanted me to do. After everything had happened, 2 years later, after me graduating high school, we ran into each other at Costco, and man, I was so much happier. I was lively. My skin was glowing. I was so hopeful. I still am, and it was that side of me that last time she saw me, I was depressed. It just made her so happy. She asked me, just come into my class, talk to my young women. And I felt unworthy of speaking to them. So me hopping on here, and for those of you who don't know, me and Leanne actually had this scheduled a while ago, but Miss Little High Achievement Successful was invited to speak at a women's conference. And that was amazing. But it's funny because I feel like now it's just very fitting. My teacher's death, obviously it's very sad, but it really kind of solidified my intention, and I'm here to redeem that, what it was that she wanted. She wanted me to speak on my experience, share it, and provide hope and wisdom for whoever needs it, whoever it resonates with.
I love that. And I know that she's here in the room right now with you. So thank you so much for sharing that. I love that so much. Shout out to her. Do you mind dropping her name?
Her name is Anne-Marie Katamopoulos.
May she be your forever guardian angel on this journey that you're on. And I know she's very proud of the woman that you have turned into. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
All right. Final question. Someone needs to sit down and write about you, this beautiful queen, when you're no longer on this living earth, which is like hundreds and hundreds of years from now. What do you want them to say about Moya?
She wild.
Yes. I love it. Yes.
And she was wild, been through a lot, had a lot to share. She's a good time. She looks a hell of a lot younger than she is. Everyone thinks she's 20, and she had a lot to give. I definitely want to be someone who leaves an impact for the generations to come, at least in my lineage, because it bleeds on over to the world at that. So I'd hope, it'd be my great, great granddaughter, grandson writing about me, about how they read all my journals, my spicy stories, and that I just had a lot to share, a lot of wisdom to give, and that I never gave up.
I love that so much. I love this conversation so much. Thank you for sticking with me despite the technical difficulties, but we made it through. I appreciate you so much for sharing your truth and your story. And I know my listeners are going to want to know more about you. They're going to want to follow you. So please talk about your podcast, talk about how we can follow you, any offerings that you have, plug it all in.
Thank you for the questions that you asked. First of all, it takes talent to ask really great, meaningful interview questions. And the technical difficulties is the life of a podcaster. I would know very well.
You know the struggle, sis.
But if you are interested in tuning into my podcast, it's called Me Da Vida Podcast. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Anchor. Feel free to tune into that. It's more so like self-awareness and just little micro doses of food for thought, I would like to say. So they're short, they're sweet, perfect if you're having a hectic day and you're like, oh, I just need a little dose of clarity or something. Feel free to tune into that. If you want to keep up with me and my other platforms, you can follow me on Instagram at Moya, which is KONMOYA. I always have to spell it. And I also do have a YouTube channel. It's called Moyita's Life. So you can feel free to watch videos there. It's not a very organized platform. I just kind of post, yo no sé qué.
Whenever you feel like it.
Lo que me da la gana. Yeah. Definitely check that out if you want. That's how you can keep up with me and what I have to share.
Thank you so much. I'm definitely going to link that all in the show notes. Moya, I just want to say it's been such a pleasure connecting with you. We've never met in person, but I feel like when you know, and you're the type of person that I just feel this connection with. with. And I just want to thank you so much for being so vulnerable, for sharing your truth, for having this uncomfortable conversation. It's going to help so many people. And I want you to continue using that voice to share your story, because you're doing so much more than you probably even know. And I just want to hold space for you. And thank you so much for just being you. You're incredible.
Oh my gosh, I love you. I needed that reassurance.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes
We
I'm
all
a little
do.
too hard on myself.
Of course. Of course. Hello. I'm a Virgo. Like, I get it. I can be my
Oh,
biggest
you're
hater.
a Virgo.
Yes. Exactly. It makes sense.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're gonna get along great when we meet in person.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you, Queen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.